So I would say let's start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar that takes place within the framework of Adjust. I will do a brief introduction of the project and then I will leave the floor to the speakers who will present their work on Deliverable 2.1 on the decarbonization pathways of the Polish economy in the European Union context. So Adjust is a Horizon Europe project which is coordinated by CMCC and carried out by a consortium of European researchers and institutions. The objectives are to achieve a step change in societal understanding of the distributional repercussions of the transition to climate neutrality, and also to identify some effective policy interventions in order to accompany this climate action in order that no one is left behind. A few technical information, your video and voice are deactivated. So if you need to ask questions, you can either raise your hand and I can activate them, or you can write in the Q&A. The presentation will last around 20-25 minutes, and then we will have space for questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. I am Zuzanna from the CAKE team. I will start the presentation. So on behalf of the CAKE team, we are pleased to present the results of our research on the decarbonization pathway of the Polish economy in the broader European Union context. Our focus today is on the macroeconomic, labor market, and distributional effects of the transition towards climate neutrality. The purpose of this analysis is to assess Poland's decarbonization pathway, with the European Union serving as a benchmark. While European Union-wide results provide a useful point of reference, our attention is placed on Poland, where the structural transformation is expected to be particularly profound due to the high carbon intensity of the economy. We will begin by presenting macroeconomic results, highlighting the expected impacts on GDP and overall economic performance. This will be followed by a detailed assessment of the transition in Poland's energy mix, illustrating how the country can align with European Union climate targets. Finally, we will turn to a labor market effects, including sectoral restructuring, distributional consequences, and implications for different groups of workers. The analysis is based on the set of CAKE models. So our analytical framework combines 4 major models, which together form an integrated system linking macroeconomic, energy, transport, and agriculture dimensions of the climate transition. The DPLACE model is the backbone. The DPLACE model is a global, recursively dynamic computable general equilibrium, CGE, model capturing interactions between sectors, agents, and regions. It reflects how carbon prices, production costs, and trade flows adjust to ensure general equilibrium. The MESA model focuses on the energy system, optimizing power and heat generation across the European Union. It determines how carbon pricing and technology cost influence the energy mix, in particular the deployment of renewables, hydrogen, and CCS technologies. TRE model represents the transport sector, using a bottom-up approach to capture changes in vehicle fleets, model shifts, and energy use patterns across EU countries. Finally, a PICA model, the agricultural sector tracking land use, production, and emission of methane and nitrous oxide. We link these models iteratively. It means that results from sectoral models feed into DPLACE and vice versa until a consistent equilibrium is reached. This ensures that changes in one part of the system, such as fuel prices or carbon costs, are fully reflected in others. Standard sectoral models provide detailed projections of structural changes within sectors, but often treat key variables such as demand, input prices, or carbon prices as exogenous. In reality, sectors are interconnected. Shifts in one area feed back into others through prices, trade, and technology diffusion. Our integrated system captures these feedback effects, ensuring that policies affecting one part of the economy propagate realistically through the entire system. For example, faster deployment of renewables in the energy sector lowers demand for emission allowances and thus reduces their price, affecting incentives for low carbon technologies in industry and renewables themselves. By iteratively linking detailed sectoral models with a comprehensive macroeconomic framework, we capture both the physical constraints and technological details of the sectoral transition and the price and income feedbacks that drive the overall economy. This integrated approach is essential for assessing cross-sectoral impacts, macroeconomic trade-off, and distributional effect of climate policies in the European Union and in member states. Let us now move to the next aspect of the analysis, which sheds further light on the scenarios and emission reduction options. So the modeling exercise considers two main scenarios based on the EU climate policy framework. The first scenario is the reference scenario, REF, which is aligned with Fit for 55 targets until 2030, assuming carbon prices remain constant thereafter. And the second scenario is policy scenario, FIT, which is consistent with the European Union net zero 2050 ambition, involving continued tightening of emission constraints beyond 2030. Each scenario incorporates a range of emission reduction mechanisms and includes improvements in energy efficiency, electrification of transport and industry, hydrogen deployment, carbon capture and storage like CCS, CCU, and structural changes in production and consumption. By simulating this mechanism across linked models, we can derive marginal abandonment costs separately for ETS and non-ETS sectors. This allows us to identify where emission reductions are most effective and where policy support or compensation mechanism might be needed. For Poland, these simulations reveal both high abandonment potential and relatively high adjustment costs, given the country's carbon-intensive baseline and slower initial technological transition. Next, we outline the key extensions to the labor market model that deepen its representation of labor market frictions and adjustment processes. A major advancement of the study is the integration of a frictional labor market into the DPLACE model. Unlike traditional CGE model, assuming a homogeneous labor force, our approach reflects worker heterogeneity, sectoral mobility costs, and differences in productivity. We introduce frictional labor flows to reflect costs of moving between sectors. Workers leaving declining industries may face wage losses or temporary unemployment, while remaining workers tend to be more productive but accept lower wages. The model also incorporates worker heterogeneity, capturing differences in both productivity and preferences. Not all workers value sectors equally. Some are more willing or better suited to work in certain industries. In addition, we model endogenous educational choices, which means that each new cohort entering the labor market chooses its educational and skill path based on observed wages and opportunities. This means that over time, labor supply adjusts endogenously to reflect economic initiatives. Older cohorts cannot easily change their skills, so their labor supply is relatively inelastic. This creates generational differences in adaptability, which means that younger workers respond to wage signals faster, while older ones bear higher adjustment costs. Overall, this model provides a much more realistic representation of how climate policies reshape employment structure and wages over time.
Okay, so now we can begin with macroeconomic impacts. The comparison of macroeconomic outcomes across different scenarios enables the assessment of the economic consequences of implementing ambitious environmental regulations. So the first one is GDP. The GDP results reflect the macroeconomic cost of decarbonization. Across the EU, GDP declines modestly, less than 1% by 2050, under the fifth scenario, compared with REF. For Poland, however, the decline is significantly steeper, reaching minus 1.78% in 2050. This divergence stems from Poland's higher carbon intensity and lower energy efficiency, which make adjustment more expensive. The economy's structure, dominated by coal, heavy industry, and traditional manufacturing, amplifies that short-term costs of the transition. From an economic perspective, these results indicate that Poland's adjustment costs are concentrated in carbon-intensive sectors, not evenly spread across the economy. The losses accumulate over time as structural reallocation of labor and capital proceeds. Importantly, these costs represent transitional effects, not a permanent drag on growth. Once new, cleaner sectors expand and productivity improves, and part of these losses could be offset in the longer run. Next is the electricity. Electricity demand rises steadily across both the EU and Poland, driven by electrification of transport, heating, and industry. In the EU, electricity use under fit scenario slightly exceeds that in REF, showing that cleaner energy substitutes for fossil fuels. In Poland, however, the difference between fit and REF is very small. This pattern indicates two offsetting effects. Higher carbon prices increase incentives to electrify, but higher electricity prices and efficiency improvements reduce overall consumption growth. For Poland, this reflects a structural change. The power sector undergoes a deep transformation, replacing coal with renewables and eventually hydrogen. Still, electricity demand doesn't surge excessively thanks to demand-side management and improved energy efficiency. In short, electricity becomes the core decarbonization vector, but its growth remains economically balanced. Next is hydrogen. And hydrogen is a crucial energy carrier for decarbonizing hard-to-adapt sectors like heavy industry, long-distance transport, and chemicals. Its use is currently low, but under the fit scenario, demand rises sharply after 2040 in both the EU and Poland. In the EU, growth starts in the early 2030s and is steady due to policy support, infrastructure, and renewable electricity expansion. In Poland, adoption begins later, but accelerates rapidly once infrastructure and investment barriers are addressed. Economically, hydrogen represents both a cost and an opportunity. The upfront investments in production and infrastructure are substantial, but they lay the foundation for the new industrial ecosystem, including storage facilities and hydrogen-based manufacturing. If supported by stable policy framework and cross-sector coordination, hydrogen could become a growth engine for Poland's industrial transformation. And the last of the macroeconomic impacts are fossil fuels. Fossil fuel consumption declines sharply in both the EU and Poland, but at different speeds. In Poland, the transition is particularly striking. Coal use falls rapidly and is almost completely phased out by mid-century in both scenarios. Oil consumption decreases gradually, and natural gas rises in the REF scenario as coal is replaced by gas, but under fit peaks around 2030 and declines strongly. However, at the EU level, the reduction is smoother and begins earlier, reflecting a more diversified energy base and higher initial efficiency. Now we can step back to Poland, because for Poland, this pattern highlights the complex sequencing of the transition. First, a substitution for coal to gas, then from gas to renewables and hydrogen. Economically, this represents capital reallocation and stranded asset risk in fossil sectors, offset by new investments in low-carbon technologies. The message is clear: the faster Poland invests in clean energy infrastructure, the lower the long-term adjustment cost.
Okay, so let us now move to the labor market outcomes, starting with coal mining employment, shown as percentage change in 2030 and 2050 relative to 2020. This slide highlights one of the most striking aspects of the transition: the near complete disappearance of coal mining employment by mid-century. Across the European Union, the process is gradual and largely anticipated, but in Poland, the impact is much more sharp. This means that while the direction of change is similar to the European Union average, the short-term adjustment costs are far greater. The country faces not only the loss of a large number of relatively well-paid jobs, but also strong regional concentration of these effects in coal-dependent areas such as Silesia. From an economic perspective, this implies high initial transition costs linked to reskilling, labor relocation, and regional fiscal pressures, even though the long-term benefits of decarbonization in terms of productivity and clear energy are significant. The following results illustrate how sectoral wage dynamics in Poland evolve under the climate policy scenario, reflecting the structural relocation of labor during the transition. Both the table and the chart present indices relative to 2013, which serves as the reference year. In Poland, wage dynamics mirrors the employment trends. Wages in mining and other extractive sectors drop significantly, around 30 to 40% by 2050, as demand for labor shrinks. By contrast, wages in non-mining industries, and especially in services, more than double or even triple. This polarization illustrates how the green transition rewards adaptability and skill mobility. Workers who can retrain and shift sectors benefit most, while those who remain in traditional industries face declining real incomes. Across the European Union, we observe similar but mild trends. Wages in extractive industries, particularly coal mining, dropped by around 40 to 45%, while pay in services, manufacturing, and construction increases steadily over time. The more diversified structure of the EU economy helps cushion the impact. The losses in fossil-based sectors are offset by job and wage growth elsewhere. Nevertheless, the same underlying pattern holds: declining traditional industries and rising high-skill, low-emission sectors. This confirmed that the wage gap between green and brown jobs is a consistent feature of the European transition. Comparing Poland and the European Union, we observe both convergence and divergence. Both experience declining wages in extractive industries and rising wages in services and manufacturing. However, the contrast is sharper in Poland, where service wages nearly triple compared to a doubling in the EU average. This highlights stronger adjustment pressure, but also greater potential for modernization and productivity growth if the transition is well managed. Kasia?
Okay, so now we can summarize our main findings. Ambitious climate policies entail short-term GDP losses, but pave the way for long-term transformation. Poland's transition is more challenging than the EU average due to its reliance on carbon-intensive industries and lower starting efficiency. The energy mix shifts dramatically, rapid coal phase-out, growing renewables, and a post-2040 hydrogen boom. Employment declines in mining, and wages diverge strongly across sectors, reinforcing the need for proactive labor and education policies. In essence, Poland faces higher transition costs, but it also holds greater potential for productivity gains and industrial renewal. The transition is not only about reducing emissions, it is about restructuring the economy for long-term competitiveness. The policy implications are clear. Climate transition strategies must address uneven impact across sectors and skill groups. Active labor market policies, such as retraining and relocation support, are crucial to help workers move from shrinking to expanding sectors. Education systems should be aligned with emerging labor market needs, ensuring that new cohorts can adapt to low-carbon industries. Without targeted support, wage divergence and social inequalities could deepen, threatening the political sustainability of the transition. And overall, the decarbonization of Poland presents both challenges and opportunities. It is more difficult than in most EU countries due to the initial dependence on the carbon-intensive sectors. Yet this also means there is greater room for modernization, innovation, and productivity gains. The extended cake modeling framework allows for a realistic data-driven assessment of these dynamics, integrating macroeconomic and microeconomic perspectives. From an economic standpoint, the transition can be seen as a process of creative destruction. Old emission-intensive industries decline, freeing up resources that flow into cleaner and more efficient sectors. The short-term output and employment losses represents the adjustment costs, while the longer-term gains include increased energy security, innovation, and sustainable growth potential. To conclude, Poland's decarbonization pathway is demanding but feasible. The economic transformation requires coordinated policies across energy, labor, and education systems to ensure a just and efficient transition. So thank you very much for your attention, and now we welcome your questions.
Thank you so much to both of you. So as I was saying before, if you want to make questions, you either raise your hand and I will activate your audio and video, or you can write in the Q&A box. Thank you. Well, apparently you were very clear.
It seems so.
Nice explanation. Everything is clear.
Yeah, so just if there are any questions, please come forward, and we'll be happy to help to clarify. Just a small comment on my side in general, a little bit at the higher level, not only related to our modeling exercise, but in general the integrated assessment models. I have a feeling that there's still a lot of things to do and a lot of tasks in front of us. And the motivation for this work was partly coming from my observations about the current generation of integrated assessment models and CG models. They are very careful about modeling the cost side and potential frictions on the demand side of the low carbon emissions. And they pay very little attention to what happens on the supply side. So how easy it will be to move from low carbon from the high carbon, high intensive production to the to shift resources to the low carbon intensive production. So we have a little bit of literature on the stranded assets, right, on the physical capital, and there we know that it's not trivial, and to some extent we take into account this problems with shifting capital from one production to the other production. But when it comes to labor, there is very, very, very little, if anything. So I don't know if you ever thought about it, but if you would ask a question whether the typical standard integrated assessment models, whether they do take into account the cost of shift of labor between sectors, the answer is no, they don't. They assume that those costs are zero. So that is problematic for a couple of reasons. One is that we don't get the proper analysis of cost and benefit, but perhaps more problematic is that we are not getting the dynamics right. So, for example, we don't take into account that delaying transformation and delaying the action and decarbonization is accumulating the stranded assets on the human capital side, right? The people are still investing in education, in a mining sector. They still go to the heavy industry instead of developing their skills for the new industries. And that means that the longer we postpone, the more stranded assets on the human capital side we have, and the more difficult it will be and more costly it will be to decarbonize and to shift later. So it actually means that we can get, by ignoring these effects, we can actually get the wrong recommendations or not appreciate enough the early action. So for this reason, I think that this is a message, I guess, to us, but also more generally to the modeling community, is to take into account this labor effects seriously.
So if nobody's having questions, doubts, concerns, feedback, anything of the sort, we can even stop the webinar here. I will leave you in the chat the website of Adjust and the website of Cobize. So if you want to know more, you will find this registration on the Adjust webpage. And if you have any question, you can either contact me or Cobize, and we will be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a nice rest of the day.
For you as well. So bye.
Thank you.